Hi everyone, delonewolf here and welcome back to EVE Talk, your weekly look at the market in EVE Online. Not too much development news over the last week, but we did get a surprise mass test, I would say, that focused on server performance. So it was pretty interesting. We were not with a lot of people, but I must say from my perspective things went quite smoothly. I was able to do everything that I wanted, to test everything that I wanted, and no crashes, no big problems or anything like that to report. And CCP very specifically had a couple of steps that took a long time because they were doing stuff at the back end to take a look at what was happening for the server. So it was definitely interesting, and from my perspective things seemed to work quite nicely. Also a couple of graphical updates that were happening there, and I basically just found one glitch which I think is something that was already there. Basically some really large missiles leave behind sort of a puff of smoke or dust, and that does tend to glitch a little bit when it comes to interactions with light and maybe other explosion and things like that. But overall, very good mass tests, nice little surprise. Not a lot of people showed up, but overall everything worked quite well. Let's take a quick look at the New Eden store then and see if anything is happening here. So we've got a new package, 50 skill extractors, 20% off for that bundle. And then I'm not noticing the sale tag or anything for the services. It's only this new item. Now I did see or receive an email, I believe it was, or was it on the launcher, that there are new starter packs. That may be the reason why Plex is continuing to fall. If you take a look at the ticker, you can see that that is the case. And quick little other news items. There is a beta launcher now, a new version of the launcher that you can test if you want to. Now I haven't done so just yet because for me the launcher works perfectly. I only have one account, but from what I've been seeing and also a little bit of feedback that was given during the mass test, it does seem to be a very big improvement for people that have multiple accounts, multiple characters and things like that. So if that's the case for you, then definitely I think take the time to take a look at the new launcher, give CCP the feedback, because the better they can make that experience, I think that's also a nice little boost for those people that support EVE Online with more than one account, which is not me. One account is plenty for me personally. So let's get into the market. We'll take a look as always first at the pilot services, and that's coming in at 250. There we go, and let's get started then with that Plex chart, if you please. So here we go. You can see basically a little bit of pressure at the tail end, nothing too dramatic though. We're still well below the 4.5 million for the daily averages. Max prices though are still above that. So in general, while over the course of the last week we lost a little bit of ground, we are still in that wait and see holding pattern. That is definitely still what I'm recognizing in this chart personally. So what are we looking forward to? I think mostly what's going to happen around the 20 years of EVE Online, of course. If we take a look at the prices themselves, and of course we got to open this up here because Tranquility Trading Tower does still try to compete very heavily. And for this week is actually the cheapest Plex available, above 4.5 million. And if we open this up here as well, you can see most sellers coming in the Tranquility Trading Tower as well, going up to just shy of 4.4 million. So a very narrow spread again for these pilot services. Exactly what we would expect. A little bit of hesitation, a little bit of back and forth, but very, very small spreads. And thus the market doesn't really know what to do next, basically. For the multiple pilot train certificates, as mentioned, this is now considered a legacy item because you can't really create more of them. If you buy a training certificate, then you actually get it applied straight to your account. That is how it functions at this point. So obviously volumes are declining and prices for what's still left do go up. Then 2.3 billion for the sellers, above 2 billion for the buyers as well. And it's not a lot of sell orders anymore. We're gonna leave it on for at least a couple more weeks, I think, just to see how a legacy item that I do think has enough consumption to really see potentially very close to the end of the item. I think there's always some people that are gonna hoard a couple just to still have that in the bag. By the way, I think that's always a very smart thing to do. It's probably annoying for the developer, but a legacy item like that becomes a huge scam potential at some point when it's completely forgotten from the active memory, you could say, of the player base, and all of a sudden you come out with something that a lot of players have never seen before. That does have scam potential. This is also the reason why I still hold a lot of old ores from that would drop back in the day from drones. So they dropped special ores that can then be refined into the regular minerals. So it's nothing special, it's not even worth a lot, but eventually I do think that'll basically die out to such an extent that all of a sudden a contract of something like that with a nice shiny icon can be super interesting from that perspective. So I definitely do that as well. Next up, we'll take a quick look at the buy prices for these above 2 billion, as I've said. Yeah, there we go. Next, we've got the skill extractors. So obviously following plex closely again at this point. I think correlation has been restored after, you can see here, while plex went up to almost 5.5 million, there was a huge sale specifically for the skill extractors that brought the price down below 400 million. So it took a little bit of time for everything to come back together, but you can clearly see here again that since last week we lost just a tiny little bit of ground, but also it does look like we have tiny spreads here. So for the sellers, 516 million, yeah, and for the buyers 490 million, 91 in fact. So that's another tiny spread on something that costs $500 million ISK, and I would say correlation between plex and skill extractors has been restored at this point. The impact on the injectors, that's a pretty annoying chart. Let's see if we can get something a little bit more useful to show up here. And you can see definitely interesting. Basically over the last week, slight uptick again in the large scale injectors and back to the highest price point, definitely the highest range of the year. We'd look at those minimum prices here as well. After a bit of a decline, I think on a plex sale here, it has started to rise sharply with the minimum prices now above the 900 million mark. If you look at the prices themselves, 960 million for the sellers, while 914 million for the buyers. That is well above the 900 million. So also for large scale injectors, that push up is just not stopping, and we are super expensive there. If I'm gonna start to hesitate here again as well. I have I think 2 large scale injectors myself that I invested in at some point, and a couple of smallers as well. This on a chart like this, especially if you're expecting that perhaps we'll see pressure on prices, maybe more sales and things like that around the 20 years of EVE Online, this does look like a decent time to try to take some profits. Small scale injectors doing the same thing, and in fact 5-day moving average at this point also highest price point of the year, so very, very expensive. Nice little push up despite the hesitation that we're seeing in plex, in extractors. So it's pretty interesting to see how we're now climbing to 195 million for the sellers, 181 for the buyers. That's a bit of a surprise here, because that is 14-ish million, 13 million actually here between the sellers and the buyers. That's a bit more spread than what we're used to, so a little bit more volatility as always with the small scale injectors, but also I think that potential to move more quickly than the large scale injectors because of that smaller spread. But very, very interesting, very expensive injectors at this point, and let's see if the daily alpha injectors can do something different. Well, I would say we are starting to hesitate at the tail end here, but clearly at the end of last week we had another push up towards the 60 million, 57 something like that here on the chart. So that is a very sharp increase in price from 40 million to almost 60 million in less than 2 months. That's also probably a little bit too much for the market to bear, and not exactly something that CCP is all that happy with, because now you're paying, well, a couple of sellers coming in all of a sudden at 53 million, definitely, you know, turning around because of that sharp increase. People are starting to take some profits, but I think those will get snagged up just by regular demand very quickly. As you can see, it's a couple of sellers and it's 55, 56 million for the sellers, and the buyers forced up to 51 million as well. Again, for me, this is a very interesting one to see how CCP will react to this reality that as they try to play central bank with an item like this, which is, in my opinion, exactly what they've done. 50 million, and then we got the price changes. so well above 50 million, but they came in with huge sales, bring the price down to 40, close to 40, and to 40 again. But you can see how that interval becomes shorter and shorter, and how the market just starts to anticipate CCP now coming in at some point, not being happy with the daily alpha injector being this expensive. In fact, I would say that's probably the reason why we've got this pullback here. That's a little bit of like anticipation on, I want to sell now and take my profit before CCP comes in with that daily alpha injector sale. So that's part of the play here as well. But clearly, this does create a predictable pattern where you can make good trades because of what CCP is potentially doing. You never know if they continue. But again, for me, very, very interesting to see if we do get like a daily alpha injector sale. If we get it before the anniversary, then I'm all about, yeah, man, they really are looking at this metric and they're trying to keep the daily alpha injector in check for those alpha players, for their routines. Next, finally, we've got the hypercores that clearly do something a little bit different than what we've seen for Plex, for instance, here. Although also starting to move sideways at the tail end, they have started to go back up a little bit. I would say general inflation expectations might be up a little bit, and then maybe a little bit more activity around the Hypernet relay. 470 to 430,000, again, pretty narrow spreads in most of these items. Let's move on to the minerals next, coming in at 1140. There we go. And as always, we start with titanium. Not good news, and another really not great chart. Why the hell would you scale up to thousands of ISK? So I can't even show you guys. I can't scale it down to show anything all too concrete. So we'll have to go and go by the prices. But you can see here 4 ISK now for the sellers. That is definitely a bit of capitulation, although they're trying to hold on. But 387 for the buyers. So buyers going well below the 4 ISK here. And potentially, especially if some sellers then say we give up completely, coming in at 399, 398, we might just be set for that lower range for titanium, selling below 4 ISK. For me, definitely I would hold on to any titanium that I'm making. I think the potential is there for enough disruptions, both from what's happening in nullsec, from the 20-year anniversary, and all the announced plans from CCP over for this year, that there could be a big boom all of a sudden where you get better prices for your titanium. And yeah, the chart not that great, but clearly too much supply for what the market needs at the moment, and pushing the prices down to 4 and below is something I did not expect personally. I thought we would have enough hype, but that is not the case. Same story apparently for pyrite. You can see here clearly also moving back to the lowest range of 1.5 months ago, and sellers basically giving up, going below the 10 at 972. Very aggressive selling here, in fact. 962 for the buyers, really narrow spread, but everything moving below the 10 is potentially a new reality and a new range. That would be the worst range over the last 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, pretty much 6 months. So not great news, but for me that means we start hoarding our high-sec minerals, not bringing them to the market anymore. And confirming the trend here is Mexalon, also coming to the lowest price points potentially in the last 10 months at this point, getting close to the 50. 50 for the sellers, for one seller here, that is an overflow, but 52 to 50 ISK for those buyers. It is definitely still a narrow spread on a lot of pressure, not good news, and plenty of sellers still coming in here with a lot of Mexalon. So for high-sec, unfortunately, your efficiency has dropped a lot this week, and I would say this is the time to start to try and choke the market, try and just not supply anymore, hoard your high-sec minerals and wait for better prices. That is a bit of a gamble, granted, because we could get stuck here in a long time, for a long time, especially if things quiet down in nullsec, and then we don't get anything all too hypey for the 20 years of EVE Online. But that would be my tactic, honestly, when it comes to the stuff that I mine in high sec. For low sec, let's see if that one continues the trend, and I would say no. You can see here how that max price actually shot up to the highest price of the year, and we're a little bit all over the place. So there is that hesitation again, but the higher volumes here clearly do show that it's a different dynamic in low sec minerals. 582 to 546, actually a decent margin that has opened up here as well. Not yet at the 10%, but getting pretty close to that. We'll have to see how this works out. At the tail end, 5-day above 20-day moving average shows a little bit of upwards pressure, but clearly we're hesitating here, and we're starting to move to larger spreads, which I think is also normal when an item starts to settle in active supply demand, which it hasn't for, well, many years at this point. So I think we'll start to see more of these movements, larger spreads as well, and yeah, price movements depending on what is actually being supplied, where are the bottlenecks, what are the active problems, and not a price dominated by those old reserves and how quickly they decide to sell. Might be interesting to look at the volumes here as well. Yeah, look at that front page. You get a couple of 15 million-ish, but you can clearly see that that's also another step down from just a couple of months ago, where 20, 30, 50 million were some of the big volumes of the front page. Nothing above 20 so far, and still nothing above the 20, and we gotta get all the way to a 650 price point where 180 million units are waiting. So clearly here again, in my opinion, what we are seeing is that those reserves are getting exhausted, and the sellers that still hold them, there are obviously still old reserves of old holdings of Isogen available to some sellers, but it's no longer I want to take some profits, so here's another 50 million units to the market. No, it's I want to take some profits, let's maybe sell another 10-ish million. That's a bigger chunk than what that most active suppliers can bring, but clearly they are getting exhausted. So pretty interesting to see how all of that is changing. And then for Noxium, a little bit down for the week, but also that same hesitation. Where should we be going from here? 900 for the sellers, 870 for the buyers, tiny spread. So here the market is I think deciding that there's apparently plenty of Noxium for us at the current price point, which is quite decent on the 1-year chart. For nullsec though, Megasite definitely, if you took that's interesting. I thought we would be going up for Zydrine as well, because Megasite moved back up, basically caught up all the losses from last week, but no, Zydrine under pressure on a lot of volumes. So the 2000 coming into play. Yeah, look at that, 1950 for the sellers, 1760 for the buyers. Very unusual, pretty large spread between sellers and buyers of Zydrine. And excuse me, but I do have to quickly drink a bit of water here. There we go, but that's very unusual to see a big spread opening up here, big volumes pushing the prices back down. This while, you may have spotted that on the ticker, Megasite actually trying to make up for the losses, and 5-day moving average coming back up and saying we want to settle at a higher price, almost 2009 for the sellers, 2400 for the buyers as well here though. So definitely a bit of a spread in those nullsec minerals. I think potentially this is where the market is again not sure on what to expect, and on the one hand you have Megasite sellers deciding that maybe activity and supplies will be low enough that we can ask for a better price, but the buyers are expecting maybe things to quiet down enough, that enough supplies are coming in, and that they can grab cheaper nullsec minerals. Very unusual situation, definitely also an interesting one to keep an eye on. And finally, we've got the Morphite market that is, as expected, heading back for the 40k mark. Still just below that for the sellers, and 39,000 for the buyers though. Fresh supply has started to come in, but this is a pattern that is quite clearly shown here in the Morphite market. So what happens is that as supplies become ample and the prices push down below the 40,000 mark, NOSIC suppliers decide that's not worth it anymore, we're holding off, prices get back to 40k and the cycle repeats. So this is something that is clearly happening in the morphite market. We're back at a higher price point, so expect more supplies and slightly better prices over the upcoming weeks. That's at least what the pattern has been for a couple of months at this point. But the fact that we're still below the 40 though, and that they haven't pushed above 40,000, does in my opinion mean that that general trend is we're basically a little bit oversupplied in morphite as well. Then I think where we won't be oversupplied is PI. Here we go at 1955. Let's take a look at that. As always, here are the broadcast nodes that make their way or manage to hold on to a price above 2.5 million. Yeah, for the sellers, almost 2.4 million for the buyers, so very expensive on the 1 year chart. As we've been mentioning for the last couple of months, incredible times for people that hold and make PI for them to sell, and this is mostly in all likeliness tied to the production of capital ships, maybe also structures a little bit considering what's happening in the war, but I still hold that this is now potentially the next bottleneck that CCP is looking into. Now they don't do take twitch decisions on something like this. I think especially on something like this it would be a very big impact for a lot of players if they would decide to nerf PI. But clearly, in my opinion, if we look at what's happening, we've got sure expensive mineral prices on a lot of fronts, but some of them are actually doing quite okay, and Noxim, for instance, nothing all too special. That here, you know, they've already tried to tinker with those bottlenecks. I think they've fixed quite a bit of that, and so what comes next is probably, in my opinion, PI. Construction blocks losing a little bit for the week, but again from a 1 year high point, so 11,000 for the sellers and 11,000 for the buyers. Very expensive. Coolants went back to a 10k, but look at the frenzy. All of a sudden, everyone, or even maybe just a couple of big players deciding then we are going to buy whatever is available up to almost 11,000. This guy, I believe it is going to be, because it's 11.7 for the sellers and 11,000 for the buyers. Exactly that. So anything that just supply comes in and brings PI down a little bit is immediately snagged up. Look at that volume spike on getting close to 10k. Enriched uranium continuing to build, which for me is another sign that there is a bit of a bottleneck in some of these PI materials as we climb from 10,000 to 12,500 ISK. Here the market takes a little bit of a breather. We managed to touch 12.5 and then we just continue to go up to 15,000 on the chart. That's definitely not something where the player base is able to very quickly respond to this 25% increase in price over just a month, and instead the demand is just so high that we can climb another similar batch of it's not 25% at that point anymore, but you understand, another 25k or 2,500 added, and in fact at the moment we're at 16,300 for the sellers and buyers forced up to 14.6 as well. Super expensive. Integrity response drones easily defending the 3 million range here, 3.2 to 3.15 million. Look at that spread, look at the desperation in the market to grab any of this PI material. And then mechanical parts, definitely also a rather unusual situation. Very common, very easy to make, but you can see how over the last couple of months we've just been pulling up from that 10,000 ISK, and we managed on a couple of days to get close to that price point, but immediately volumes do come in and take advantage of these cheaper prices, and now there's basically a bit of capitulation as we go to 15,000 ISK for mechanical parts and 13.6 for the buyers. So buyers are a little bit more careful here, quite normal because it's so much easier to make mechanical parts, but this is clearly another breakout, another 1 year high point, which you would not expect considering the start of the year basically in PI in general. Then we get, unless as I've said, there is a bit of a bottleneck problem there. Then we get miniature electronics that you know, are going back down for the last couple of weeks, but look at where we went for refined PI material, 22,500 disk. My historical perspective is this, where we started at 10k for a refined PI material is a normal price. You can be a little bit above that for the harder to make stuff, and then sometimes on the cheap days you're below that for like coolants, mechanical parts and things like that, but they have enough consumption to keep things stable. But this is of course a very, very expensive price, where finally I would say there is a bit of a response in supply as well, probably some more production happening because of these crazy prices, but all they managed to do is bring the price down to 18,000 for the sellers and almost 17,000 for the buyers. That's still a very narrow spread considering how expensive we are. Nano factories slowly trending down, but still clearly most expensive price for pretty much the entire year at 1.35 million, 1.25 million pretty much for the buyers, so narrow spread here. Organic motor applicators also settling at a price above 1.25 million, so very expensive. And then our recursive computing modules, look at how high these volumes are sustained. So this was a little bit of a speculative jump because of some information that was gathered from the test server, and now at this point, I mean, it's still like 2.4 million for the sellers, 2.2 million for the buyers. You could say a little bit surprising that CCP would decide that the recursive computing module becomes part of like a new production line. I think it is with like the ship casters and things like that, that it has something to do with that. While PI is already so expensive, so they basically pushed one of the advanced PI materials that was hovering around $1 million and brought it to 2.5 million because of even more usage. So yeah, be careful, I would say, in all of this. I've been selling from too early, right? Even at the start of the year here on these bumps, I've been selling most of my stuff. But I'm not sure how long CCP is going to tolerate these kinds of moves as robotics stays above 100,000. Just look at that spread here again, 107 to 105,000. Very, very expensive. And then rocket fuels, the first one to go back down, or no, second one to go back down for a couple of weeks. But again, it's quite relative. After several months spent at 15,000 discount, you could say finally a little bit of a breather, a little bit. Excuse me. Excuse me, but a little bit of supply finally coming in for rocket fuels. 13,400 for the sellers, 12,400 for the buyers. That is still a great price. Self-harmonizing power cores had that 3.5 million spike in March, but is able to stay above 2.5 million for the sellers. Even the buyers are above 2.5 as well. Smart fab units, this one is a little bit different. You can see that from the volumes. So this one actually does have that potential because of the lower volumes, the lower usage, the lower needs to push back down in price substantially, 71,000 to 60,000, back to the range we had for first half of the year. Definitely pretty unusual, and I would say that here you can see a little bit of potential as well. You never know which route CCP takes, of course. On the one hand, they could just decide it's too expensive, so we're going to, like, for instance, nerf the need or increase yields or something like that, something very general. But they could also look into, well, maybe we can have a little bit more smart fab units requirements that would also require, of course, lots of players to overhaul their planners and things like that. But that's the type of tweaking that can happen as well. So I'm not saying that you should expect a general pullback in everything. Perhaps CCP will try to micromanage enough to say that, for instance, smart fab units, well, it's a specialized PI material, but if we compare the volumes with, for instance, the robotics, or with, if I'm not mistaken, stuff that's used here for implants, it's clearly lagging behind, which also means that its price is more volatile and can be pushed back down on not too much supply. So there are definitely still differences like that that would give them levers to perhaps fix some of the bottlenecks as well. So who knows which direction CCP might take, but again, that is my personal expectation. I don't have a crystal ball or anything like that, that at some point CCP will move in here. Sterile conduits still well above $1 million as well, 1.4 almost for the sellers, 1.2 for the buyers. Here we got our supercomputers, 150k to 133k. Look at that 1 year chart, started close to 50,000, triple the price. And I started selling here December, January. That's where I did most of my selling. Clearly too early, but these are extremely expensive times for PI. Synthetic oil did a bit of a pullback. The first one, you could say, that really pushes back down quite a lot from 15,000, and we have settled now below 10,000 for the first sellers. So that's obviously one where, yeah, right, it's not uniform across the board, granted, but this also comes from a couple of extremely good months here. Synthetic synapses, as we saw as well, 126,000, so very expensive, although started the year a little bit better because it is used in the implant production. And then transcranial microcontrollers, actually one of the early movers back above 100k, and is now still well above that as well. 110 basically for both sellers and buyers. Very narrow spreads here. And then our water-cooled CPUs, look at the volumes that have gone up, and then you can see how the spreads have gone up here as well. So clearly the market is not sure what to do basically with water-cooled CPU, because it started the year being a not so popular item, 5,000 disk, probably easily 50% below most of the others, but all of a sudden it has caught up here. We are now talking 10,600 for the sellers. But yeah, not sure which way to go, so buyers are still below 9,000. Is creating bigger volumes, bigger spread, does have a lot of trade potential because of that, but be careful, because just like with the smart fab units, not that much supply can actually crash this price quite hard. And finally, we get to it where mainframes that are also staying quite easily above 2.5 million for the seller. So for PI, another tremendous month if you're producing and selling very expensive, basically across the board. Next up is advanced moon materials at 3050. And there we go. And as always, we start with the carbides. I think my expectation here is basically quite a stable market overall, despite what's happening in NASDAQ. It does feel so far that basically CCP came in here in December, nerfed the output for moon mining in order to protect the value of what's actually being created there, and that they've succeeded in that, but that overall the market then has shrugged everything off and said, here we are at the new ranges, and we are stabilizing mostly on a lot of these items. So 143 to 141, pretty narrow spread, and you can clearly see a little bit more down a little bit in the last couple of months, but quite stable, nothing too dramatic to report. For Caldari, it's titanium carbide that is now slowly creeping back up above 150, 160 now for the sellers, 160 for the buyers as well. So there's definitely always a pretty narrow spread in advanced moon materials. But it tends to be pretty slow and steady. I think mostly around probably meta, what's happening, which chips are popular, and also just you know, what does NASDAQ want, need produced, that gets priority, and then you get a move like this, for instance, for Caldari chips at the moment. Then we've got Minmatar, man. With ferrite carbides, quite unusual, but then within my personal expectations, you do have sometimes big volumes that can push the price up, although it comes from a pretty cheap price below 125. It pushed us up towards the 150, not quite there though, 140 you could say, but then in a market like this where there is basically enough supply to keep it steady, the response is very quick, as you can see that supplies came in to take advantage of this slightly better price, or well, decently better price, and brought us right back down to a 120 for the sellers. So any of these spikes that do happen, and they're pretty rare, they don't last very long. Then we've got Minmatar, which is or Amar, excuse me, which is here, tungsten carbide, that's now starting to hover around the 150. Stabilizing here, 160 to 157, bit of a better week at the moment for tungsten carbide. All right, then we got our metamaterials. Start with Galente. Here is photonic metamaterials. That one is very nice, and definitely in a sell opportunity if, like me, you followed that trade. I sold most of it at this point, if I'm not mistaken. Not really sure what I did last week because of work, but look at that. Before the nerf to the output, 7,500, then we settled at around 10k. We had really tough time getting anywhere from here, right? 10,000, this slight opportunity here, but then finally we did push up to 12,500 and above, but the response is coming in basically right now. Sellers down to 11.9, 11.7. As I've said, when you do see those sell opportunities, you gotta be fast, although here we've had a week of being able to sell these photonic metameters, but I think we'll just see faster and faster responses in all of this as well, as the supply lines have stabilized and everything is basically settled down quite nicely. So here, yeah, you can see how supplies are starting to bring prices down, taking advantage of this unusually high price. Then for Caldari, okay, I was wrong. Here another volatile push, not even on that much in volume, from 15k to currently selling at almost 19,000 ISK. A bit of supply pushes back, I think, from 19,000, but 15,000 for the buyers. So you have another sell opportunity if you did buy some non-linear metamaterials in the first 6 to 7 months of the year. So perhaps to try and explain why I took the gamble in the metamaterials rather than the carbides. It was because they were more expensive as a baseline, right? 10,000 ISK a unit rather than a couple of hundred or 150, 100 ISK per unit. And the reason then why I made a move on this was because I was hoping that a multiplier in the base production from what is being mined in moons would eventually ripple through and create the volatility that, well, we're finally seeing here. I did not expect it to take basically 5 months before any of that would really show up, but here it is, that ripple finally in non-linear metamaterials. Actually a daily average was pushed up to 25k. Unfortunately, you can see how we're going back down very quickly, but this is a nice sell opportunity. And then of course, rather than selling stuff that's now 150, would maybe be pushed to 200, you're selling something that you bought at 10,000 ISK and you are trying to sell it at 19k, 18k. So you get a little bit more, I think, for less product, so a better trade in my opinion. So I'm quite surprised, but yeah, Galente last week, clearly you could have sold at a nice profit. This week Caldari is doing a nice jump. Let's take a look at Minmatar. Plasmonic metamaterials doing the opposite, coming back down, went to 13,000. So again, if you bought below 10,000 ISK, that was already a decent trade, but not the best. And we are pushing back down 11.5 to 10,500 ISK. Is this the start of a volatility cycle that you can start to really trade on? So buy below 11, sell above 13,000. I'm honestly not sure, because unfortunately, while it took a long time for this type of volatility to show up in the metamaterials, the carbides have shown that once it's done, the market does tend to stabilize. Things. So not really sure if you can start to say that this is perhaps a pattern that's worth trading on. Here, for instance, I think Amar shows this far more clearly in what I want to try to say here. You could have bought this below 10,000 ISK in the first 7 months of the year. Then we had the nerf, and finally here as well in March you had your sell opportunity close to 20k. But you can see how that was actually pretty slow and steady. Now we're coming back down. We're settling at 16 for the sellers, almost 16,000 for the buyers. And what I'm afraid of is that this is pretty much the same picture as what we've seen here for Carbide. What I did not expect is that they would have an early push, because of course they're closer to the source at just around 150. And then they immediately start to just move in that new range, and we don't see an increased volatility. Basically, we're a couple of months later, and the same story is happening right here in the metamaterials. We have the volatility, we have the sell opportunities, but my expectation honestly is that the market will weather this storm, will just find a new range, and will start to move within a pretty narrow band from here. So I would say if you did also buy some metamaterials below 10,000 ISK, take advantage of these sell opportunities, because while I did not expect it to take this long to finally show up, what I think happened is that there were still enough reserves in the system to keep everything basically in check for the metamaterials for a couple of months, but eventually the ripple that will have been created by pushing the raw materials, the step below that, to higher prices. And it can be other sources as well. This is just the stuff that we keep an eye on. Eventually, you do run into that bump as well, and that is when you get something like this and a nice sell opportunity. So definitely take advantage of that, because behind this one, honestly, I'm expecting actually stable times. Then we've got the other advanced move materials. Here is fermionic condensates, definitely pushing up as well, selling for almost 50,000 disc, which is not bad at this point. Does show that on a couple of days we can push up, and then supplies bring us right back down, but the gains have basically been cemented, I think. Same story here for ferrogel. Push up to 30k, and now we're stabilizing but staying above 25,000. Pretty nice on the 1 year chart at this point. Fullerites also settling above 700, 720 to 711. Not that bad. Hypersynaptic fibers, bit of too much supply, I think, bringing us back down below 6,000 ISK. Then we got our nano transistors pushed up to 4k here, pushed up to 3.5. So again, yeah, we're basically stabilizing above the 3000 ISK range. Phenolic composites stabilizing below the 1500 range. Pressurized oxidizers, bit more volatility in this one. As mentioned before, it is a newer item, so double top at 15,000. Pushed back down at 10,000 ISK, and this is where buying has started yet again. And reinforced carbon fiber actually holding on to 12,500 ISK, not bad. A little bit better than pressurized oxidizers here. Might be a sign that, yeah, you could have bought here, or you can try to buy here as close to 10,000 as possible, and that higher prices are an option. Then we get ceramic fibers. Again, that's the same story. So you can see here, this is the push that we're seeing right now in some of the metamaterials, but we pushed up 400 ISK, even a day at 500 ISK. Here is your sell opportunity, and what lies behind that spike is unfortunately a new range and a quite stable market. So pretty interesting. I definitely need to check and unload my metamaterials at this point. I think I want to take those profits because as I've said, it came so much later. I thought we would just never see it. I thought all we would see was, well, here we get this bump in the carbides, here's the new range, that's it, and that basically the metamaterials would be able to weather that storm and stay pretty stable. They basically pushed up in a more limited way and just started to move straight into that new band. But now, no, I have these surprise sell opportunities, so I will take advantage of them. Impact on Tech 2 could have an impact on Tech 2 in my opinion. It is potentially a more expensive component that just jumped up. So let's take a look at these. 4140. And there we go. Let's go through the list. Here is the Basilisk that is turning the corner. You can see here Caldari. I think there is a need for Caldari ship production, and clearly, while we haven't gone back below 130 million, we did have a substantial pullback with, look at that, even a minimum price on 1 day below that 130 million. Whoever bought here is probably pretty happy. Sellers 148, 132. I think we'll need to wait a little bit more before the ripple that we see right now in the metamaterials shows up here, but I think the potential is there. Cerberus back above 150 and actually flat for the week, 162 to 148. Curse though, there we go, last couple of weeks very expensive. Amar prices, and look at the spike here, 1 year high point, great sell opportunity if you were patient and you held on to your curses. 230 million, buyers forced up above 200 million, and look at that, you could have probably bought below 130 in the first 7 months of the year. So there we go, nice sell opportunity right here. Unfortunately, same story. I think after this we'll probably just start to stabilize at the new range, and so it's all about finding those new lower price ranges. But this is that trade potential that we were hunting for half a year ago to half a year ago, and in the curse it's happening right now. Damnation actually not that great, but still above 300 million, so unfortunately here it's probably this and this 400 million sell opportunity, and now here is the new range, 330 to 303 million for a Damnation. The Deacon is still quite expensive as well at the moment. 27 million for the sellers, not that much supply. 23 million for the buyers, but no 1 year high point to spot. The Eagle actually seeing a little bit more pressure, back below 150. Buyers are indeed, sellers and buyers are below 150. So unfortunately, of course, the trade you buy below 130 and you sell at 180, that's not on the books, but perhaps below 150 could be the low range for the Eagle. Look at the volumes as well. Basically, a market that's not doing all that great volume wise could be okay to jump in, as it's now relatively cheap. And then if you want to make a fleet of Eagles, I do think it makes some sense. Then we get the EOS. Here's another double top, close to 400 million on a couple of days. And then unfortunately, I think we'll start to again go down in the max prices, go up in the minimum prices, and settle at probably 330 as well, just like the Damnation. 330 for the sellers, 292 for the buyers. That's pretty much right on the money. The Aries coming down from that double top as well, so we might be late on this one. The Flycatcher did exactly what could happen now again for the Basilisk, for instance. I think so, considering the Caldari production line is apparently getting a bit of a jolt, but you can see here very clearly your sell opportunity jumped up to 75 million, and then we just, overshoot a little bit, but we settle down at a price above 50 million. So that is the expected pattern. So for instance, for the Curse, I would definitely, if you want to sell and take a profit there, I would take it. Flycatcher. Next we've got the Guardian. That one that's also difficult to spot, right? Because you buy, for instance, close to 100 million, 110, something like that, and then you see here, whoa, 150 million. That's been a while. Maybe a good time to sell. Ooh, 170 million. Well, we haven't seen that all year. Let's sell. But no, we just keep pushing up to 200 million. That is definitely a difficult chart to trade in, but after that you can clearly see now, 150 to 180, that seems to be the new range. 180 to 160 in fact for the sellers and buyers, and so we could just be stabilizing after that. Heretic just coming down again as well, last couple of weeks from that high point here, 68 million, right? Buy close to 30, sell at 68. That is not bad. Then the Hound, very, very disappointing for me personally. If there is one historically where I've made a lot of his trading Tech 2 ships, it is the Stealth Bombers, because those are very useful fleets in big fights, but they also sometimes get caught in bubbles, and then you gotta replace the whole fleet. But we get basically one push up to 25 million, which in my opinion is not that great, and then we settle down back below 20 million, which I think is lower than what I would have expected. So it does feel to me like Stealth Bombers are not doing that great. Ikitursa slowly going back up. At the moment I would say not enough volatility to really make a lot of risk in the Triglavian stuff. Ishtar slowly coming down, so again here that is the pattern that we would expect. Your sell opportunity was at 190 a couple of months ago, and then you can see here sometimes we try to push back, but the trend is that we will probably settle 160-ish, 168 to 160, yep, something like that. Then we get the Kirin. Here is your bump at 30 million, and here is your settling down. And then another Stealth Bomber, pretty disappointing. At the moment quite expensive, but it's 24 million. It's not even that awesome of a price. And then we get the Nemesis, same story, slow burn to 20 million, not much to say. Quite disappointing actually. And then here we've got the Nighthawk that had a bump. Now looks a little bit weird, probably on a lot of supply, but I think current range 350 to 310. Command ships 330ish, something like that, seems to be the new range. Oneros double top, so there are other patterns as well. So here, sell opportunity at 180, sell opportunity at 180, coming back down below 130. The one thing that I gotta warn you, which I quite often do for the Aneros though, look at the volumes. They're not traded all that often, so it is a far more risky trade than on a more popular ship. But this does have a nice pattern to it. 130, where are those buyers now? 125, so you can try to buy an Aneros close to 130 million. And if another spike happened, try to sell at 180. But again, the volumes are not that great. It is a bit more risky. Purifier, only stealth bomber that had a push up to 30 million and is now back to 20-ish settling, 22. So you had one sell opportunity so far in the stealth bombers. The Rook is trying to do something here, going back up to 185. So you do have a sell opportunity compared to the prices like half a year ago. But again, here is that pattern. We jumped up to 200 million a couple of months ago. That was probably your best sell opportunity. Saber, same story, right? Early March jumped up to 60 million, quite delayed compared to everything else. And you in fact had the opportunities to buy for 35 million up to the middle of February, right? Quite a lot of buy opportunities, and here it happened on nullsec and all of that good stuff. 60 million, almost 100% profit here between sellers and buyers. And now unfortunately I don't think we'll see 35 million or anything like that. The push back down is quite severe though, 44 million to 41 million. You could maybe try to jump in. I would be a little bit careful not to buy too many of them, but yeah, we have seen before. I think it's, for instance, no, not the curse. That one is doing something right now, but it was maybe, not even, you gotta be careful. You gotta be careful. We could actually settle down, but this does feel like we're pushing back. Look at how that daily average is staying well below the 5-day moving average, and how those minimum prices are basically really falling off a cliff. Might be a bit too much too quickly, and maybe like a 50 million is the new settling price, so there's maybe a smaller trade to be had here. Then we get the scalpel, settling down at 15 million, clearly not that popular. Then we get the scimitar, settling down at 130 to 120. Maybe a buy opportunity if there is a need all of a sudden for logistics. Sleipnir, 270 to 250. That is definitely cheaper than all the other command ships. It is Minmatar, so it is a little bit strange. You also have the volumes, something that I did expect. I think I even mentioned it last week. If you want to field some extra command ships in your bigger fleets, at the moment the Sleipnir is so much cheaper than everything else. That's what I would buy, but I'm quite surprised that price-wise it seems to have been shrugged off completely. And then we get the Vagabond. 150 again, not that great, and the Zarmasts staying above 400 million, pretty stable. So you really do have to keep a close eye on that Tech 2 market. You have those sell opportunities that do happen, and I have to say, the Curse, it's an Amarr ship, which over the last couple of weeks, the Amarr advanced move materials were quite expensive. So this week we've got a surprise jump in the Kaldari version, so maybe the Basilisk and the Cerberus are set for another spike in a couple of weeks. We'll have to keep an eye on that and see if that is indeed a pattern that we might want to keep in mind. But for now, you can definitely try to sell, especially if you bought like me, 6 months ago, a year ago, something like that. And I would actually try to take advantage, especially in pronounced 1-year high points like for the Curse, because the pattern in advanced move materials so far is that after this there is a stable period at higher prices, so not as easy a trade as what we've got going at the moment. Then we get our Tech 3 ships next, coming in at 52.20. There we go, let's get started. Here is the Confessor. Look at those minimum prices settling at the 50 million mark, coming in at 58 to 52. So this is, I think, a wartime jump in price, and unfortunately we're settling at a more expensive price. which is actually maybe not that surprising, considering, in my opinion, when it comes to these tactical destroyers, that they are, compared to what you can get for Take-Two ships, they've been so cheap for so long that basically this market couldn't move anywhere. And now Take-Two has become more expensive, so after this bump, well, the confessors will probably stabilize here as well, and volume wise it's still not great, so I wouldn't be looking at too much volatility. Here is the Hecate settling below 60 million, 59 to 55 million, and then we get the Jackdaw that had the one spike here in March again as well, up to 80 million, but is settling decently high in the price range at 57 to 52 million. Again, I've definitely preferred Take-Two ships because I do think that more spikes and pronounced 1-year high points are possible compared to these tactical destroyers, which now are basically settling at a more expensive price, which puts them right back into the not that interesting price power proposition compared to some of the Take-Two ships, in my opinion. And then basically the one that I like to use to prove my point is the fact that the Zwepel is now so unpopular that the volumes are next to nothing. For instance, 6 here in a day, 10 in a day, that's what's being traded on the Zwepel. And all the others have resettled at a new price range, because at least a Confessor fleet, a Jackdaw fleet and a Hecate fleet, you get a use for that. But the Zwepel is just stuck. It's right here, just a little bit above 50 million. That is it, and basically no one is all that interested in the tactical destroyers at the moment, and especially now with these guys settling just below 60, I think it's just going to be the same compared to Take-Two ships, unfortunately. Where we have a little bit more success, I feel, was in the cruisers. So here is the Legion chart, and you can see here, buy below 180, sell above 200, buy below 180, sell above 200. Then we are settling at a more expensive range. That's actually kind of normal, looking back at what's happening in Take-Two, what's happening with the other destroyers. But we get a healthy 250 sell spike. Here we get very close to a 180. We can sell again above 200. So I think here there is more trade potential at the moment. Unfortunately, 204 to 185. That is right in that in-between spot, so we could be in for another stable period. Hopefully we can get a little bit too much supply so we can create a buy opportunity, but that of course needs to be seen. But for instance here, that's definitely a pretty nice chart. Again, here is the Loki. Now it used to be in the first half of the year, buy below 180, sell at 200, right? That was the pattern that we were mostly looking for. And then we got another spike here up to 230, settling down again, buy below 180, above 200, buy below 180, get to 230, and here we touched the 180 million again as the minimum prices start to come back up. So again, it's a little bit higher now, right? Jumping in is gonna have to be a little bit earlier, but I think here we are set again. Look at those minimum prices starting to take off. I think we're probably gonna be close to 192. Oh, actually it's a 180, but so the trades that are actually successfully done is basically in the seller's market at this point. Those buyers are too late, but on this side of the chart here, you could have probably bought well below 190, 185, 183, maybe even on a day like this. That's the interesting part to jump in, and now we are set to go back up. And if you can then sell, where are the sellers at the moment? 196, but if you can get back to a 205, maybe even a 210, that's a tradable chart. That's pretty damn good. So we're just too late, probably a week too late to jump in on the Loki. But that trade potential I think is still here. Produce, least popular one. You can see how that min-max spread is a lot less than some of the others, so this one is not that great in my opinion, although the latest pattern has been buy well below 200 million and then try to sell at 230 to 40. That's been possible 1, 2, 3 times over the last maybe even 4 times here over the last half year. That is not so bad. Unfortunately, again right now 205 to 194, yeah, that's right in the middle of this whole thing. So I wouldn't jump in. And I think the Tengu was pretty interesting, started to really drop off as well. managed to stick to that 200 to 230 range for quite a little bit, but the first signs of capitulation are here as the Tango is now selling below 200 million. Buyers still at 187, they're a little bit too aggressive, drop that off a little bit more, so we still need like probably a couple dozen ships to bring that range down to somewhere where we want to jump in. But overall, I do feel like especially the Legion and the Loki have very interesting charts and have very nice trade potential, especially compared to the destroyers. So definitely something to keep a close eye on. Here the Loki was last week. That's where you could have bought your cheap Loki. Unfortunately now we're back on the uptrend. And then the Legion, if this is a settling down, that is dangerous. But you know, I think potentially enough supply can bring that 180 close to the minimum prices again. Look at jumping in there. It is all a possibility, and in my opinion, far better choice than the destroyers. And then we still have the extra product for the week. We're gonna continue a little bit in the faction ship cycle. So 5840 for faction cruisers. Let's go, ships. Cruisers, definitely pretty popular ships here. So pirate faction, let's go. Here is the Ashimu. Last week I think we were basically expensive for most faction ships except for the Navy faction ships, where more supply because of direct enlistment and the changes there has just created cheaper prices, more raw materials, you could say. So the Ashimu 180, down from the high point in November and January where it touched 200 million, but I would say a 180, 185 for the sellers. 154, bit of spread opening up here, although it's not that great, it's slightly expensive. It's also not the most popular one, I think. Cinnabal actually doing okay, still above 200 million. It is very expensive and more popular, but 235 to 203 is actually not that expensive on the 1 year chart. Then we've got the Ortrus, stable below 400 million, very popular ship, of course, the Ortrus. Yeah, actually well above average, I would say. 394 to 367, quite expensive. Next we've got the Phantasm. Oof, that's a pretty bad chart. Let's go straight to the prices. 261 to 234. And now I'm actually interested in the chart. Let's see if I can get something here. All right, actually around average for most of the year, so this feels like it's decently affordable. Stradios is an important one, incredible tech one with covered ups capabilities, probably very popular as well, but I feel like this is okay. 320 to 294 million, so you can probably snag one for 300 million. That feels like it's doable. Gila, very popular for me personally as a PvE ship. Look at that, dropping off at the tail end. Are we below 300 million for the buyers? Yeah, look at that, 284, 315, enough supply to push the average prices down substantially. So you're actually getting a Gila probably for less than 300 million, not bad. And then finally the Vigilant, I think more of a PvP platform, actually also quite doable. 264 to 250 million ISK. So, alright, it's been a while, but I would say pirate faction cruisers, it is of course quite relative, but they tend to be quite doable, except for the Ortrus. That one is still crazy expensive. Then we've got our Navy faction ships. We start with the Stormbringer, that is in a crazy range, and obviously look at that March spike up to 500 million ISK. Part of the meta in the war for someone, because that timing cannot be an accident. Still going for 340 to 311 million. Very, very expensive on the 1 year chart. Not the time for someone to decide that they want to try out a Stormbringer, and that is due to nullsec. But then we have the others, and that's going to be a different story. Here is the Augur Navy issue, and you can see how a 50 to 60 million range was available for most of the year. Then we get a little bit of a February spike, probably on some action itself, and then we settle down. But look at the tail end here, definitely seeing more and more pressure on the prices, with minimum prices coming back down a little bit. 49 million to 43 million. I would say this does, yeah, well below the 50, so this is actually a pretty cheap Augur Navy issue. Then for Kaldari we've got Caracal Navy issue, right? Same story, settling now below 50 million, 49 to 44 million. So again, just look at the volumes as well. Availability has increased. Activity in faction warfare has increased. Executor Navy issue, look at that one. But also very similar, just below 50 for the sellers, 46 million for the buyers. I think this will be the pattern. Here is the Omen Navy issue, 50 to 46. Osprey Navy issue actually going back up a little bit. All right, bit of surprise, 53 to 48 million. Still quite affordable, of course. Sight Fleet issue for Minmatar, yeah, 50 to 45. Stabber Fleet issue, quite a boring one actually, this section, 48 to 45. And finally Vexor Navy issue, bit more popular, I think, 50 million to 47 million. So this really does now show what CCP has been able to do on the one hand. On the other hand, if you're looking for volatility and thus for maybe trading the faction warfare waves or something like that in these faction ships, that really seems to be off the books at this point. Volumes have gone up really substantially because these faction ships are of course now needed for certain content within faction warfare, which I think is definitely an interesting choice, right? On the one hand, they're giving them more use, thus those volumes go up, and at the same time they have of course made the rewards very specific towards faction warfare production chain, or faction ship production chains, I should say. So the availability has gone up as well. Everything is actually quite affordable, especially on the 1 year chart, but as a result you have a very stable market, which means that your trade opportunities have become very, very limited. So here Vexor Navy issue, look at that jump in volumes, and then with the prices not going anywhere, that means that availability has basically gone up just as much, or maybe even a little bit more. Slight volatility still in the Kaldari ships for some reason, so maybe something like Osprey Navy issue and Kaldari Navy issue. I mean, I can definitely see the PvE element here, right? These are just generally strong PvE ships with shields, drones, missiles. That is that perfect combination, at least in my opinion. But I think maybe even in nullsec and in PvP, they might have a bit of an edge in general as well. So pretty interesting, but confirming so far that on the one hand there is more activity, but there is also more availability, and thus cheaper and more stable prices for these Navy faction ships at the moment. And there we go, guys, that's it for this EVE Talk. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, I'll see you next time.